Most procurement technology sales reps have never implemented the software that they're selling you. They understand the features, but they don't necessarily understand what happens to those features when they have to coexist with your production planning cycle, your maintenance workflows, or multi-entity finance structures. They're measured on the sale, and this means that the responsibility falls on you as procurement professionals, supported by your IT team, of course, to understand the architectural implications of system decisions that you're making before you make them. This week, the only thing that should actually drive your procurement technology architecture decision. And it's not which vendor has the best sales pitch or slide deck. All right, so this week's newsletter issue is about a question that every procurement leader eventually faces. Do I invest in my ERP system for my procurement processes, or do I go get a source-to-pay suite or procurement platform as my foundation? And this includes intake and orchestration first providers in that second category, right? Suite platforms, they're all the same as far as I'm concerned. So most organizations are relying on the wrong inputs to find the answer to this question. I think there's two main principles here that should be the anchor to your inputs. Number one, adoption is what drives data quality. Data quality is what enables savings in the price of purchase savings and or automation if it's a optimization play. And automation is where the ROI lives, right? If you're not getting price savings up front. So that's principle number one. Principle number two, every data interface in a solution architecture is a liability. Integration is where business transformations go to die, and that's not just true in procurement, it's true across the board. And so when you look at these two principles, one thing becomes clear. Your industry determines what the foundation should be, at least the default foundation from which you should iterate. Full stop. And once you understand why that is, and we'll get into that, a huge percentage of your architectural decisions and the debates around them resolve themselves. So I make this argument in three parts, right? Number one, the framework. So 2 scores. I said there's 2 principles. So how do we put a number to those principles? Number one is the user experience score. So that's my proxy for adoption, for how my users will adopt the system once it's rolled out, configured, and they are asked to use it. So if I have, in general, fewer steps, fewer systems, fewer screens, fewer clicks, that all means less cognitive load on the average user to use the solution to execute the business process, right? But you don't want to necessarily reduce user experience to those scores or those clicks, right? You would want to ask something like, would a reasonably intelligent person who's got some basic knowledge about the process that they're interacting with, would they be able to complete this workflow or complete this transaction, this process without much training? Right. And everything else is just a proxy or an indicator to help you with that. All things being equal, if I have more screens than less screens, and the answer to my question is yes, then I'm going to want to go with the solution that has less screens, right? So that's number one. Number two, if I translate my principle, right, is interface count. So whenever you're doing solution architecture with your IT team, you're going to have to grab vendors from here to put them in a suite, or contract prices, contract data, purchase orders, invoices, like every data object that needs to be exchanged between 2 systems. That's an integration, or that's an interface, right? And so I want to list those out as I'm doing a system architecture. And the more there are, the more disadvantage that solution architecture should be to one we're comparing against. And so those are the 2 scores that I think are really interesting or really important. And you want to maximize user experience and minimize the number of interfaces. And when you start doing that across the board in various different companies, there's a trend that emerges. There's 2 groups. Number one, indirect only businesses. So things like insurance, banking, software as a service firms, professional services, media, right? Your procurement process is going to be the same, right? You go from requirement, requisition, sourcing, contracting, requisitioning and purchase orders, receipts, invoice processing. But you don't have production planning. You don't do maintenance on machines. You don't have spare parts. You're not managing inventory. And so in that context. A modern source-to-pay suite or intake and orchestration platform handles the full life cycle natively within it, right? It eliminates a lot of the swivel chair activities that you're doing in SharePoint, going to email, doing all this this manual work. If you've got if you're in ERP and you don't support a lot of those, I'll call them soft stakeholder management processes or workflows. And so in that setup, it makes sense to have two integration boundaries. Master data coming in from your finance system, your vendors, your GLs, your cost centers. Then you can do the whole process in your source to pay foundation, augmented potentially by best of breed solutions. And at the end, you're able to approved invoice data can go to the payment system or your financial system for payment, right? That's the right architecture because it's going to give me the best overall user experience. And it's also going to limit the number of integrations versus trying to do stuff in ERP where the user experience is not great, even though there's not that many integrations. But once we'll start looking at the second group, which is direct businesses that do, MRO purchasing or production, so manufacturing, energy, utilities, healthcare, oil and gas. Procurement is entangled with production planning, with maintenance and asset management, with inventory management, quality control, cost accounting, and so on, right? And these other workflows aren't adjacent. They are the workflows. They're your main source of purchasing requirement. And they all live in an ERP type system. They've always lived in an ERP type system. And to me, there will always continue to live in an ERP type system where the big value is integrating them so that, I can't pay a supplier before I've received. I can't goods issue before I've put something in inventory. I can't receive into inventory before I've bought, and so on, right? If I'm going back up the chain. And so if I'm trying to pull out my procurement process like P2P from the ERP system, then I'm creating a whole bunch of interfaces that wouldn't have needed to be there. And yes, I just said the user experience in my indirect businesses is not ideal in ERP, and that remains true for direct-based businesses or MRO-based businesses. But the cost of trying to integrate my P2P process, which is, becomes prohibitive because the number of interfaces in that second context multiplies over time. And if I have multiple ERP systems, it's an exponential curve in terms of the number of integrations needed to support that. So in this scenario, to me, the question is more, how can I bolt on solutions to my ERP to improve the user experience, to improve the data quality I'm going to get at the end of the day, while reducing the number of interfaces to the max, right? And if I try to pull the whole P2P process outside ERP, I don't optimize for that question. And sometimes I'll get this, the question of like, well, our ERP is really old. We want to move the procurement process out of it because, that's easier than fixing the ERP or changing out the ERP. And I would argue that, that's a quick fix or a shortcut that's not going to really bring you to where you want to go because the integrations are still critical with the other processes and those process dependencies remain real as well, right? So if you do goods receipt in another system, well, you're still going to need to integrate back into your ERP so that inventory gets updated and so on, right? So you create the need for additional interfaces over time, or you disconnect integration, which goes against the whole principle of having an ERP and integrated, and you erode the value from an integrated business. So essentially, if you're in that situation, right, if you're in a direct business, like you're getting a bad deal, right? Like just because of the nature of your industry. And so even if you have a bad ERP, like the most impactful thing you can do for procurement and for the business is potentially modernize that ERP and then think about how to provide a better user experience around the edges, right? Catalog management platform integrated with your requisition. How do I support supplier confirmations of purchase orders, like bolted on to the top of our ERP so that we get the data that we need for production planning and so on. What's the conclusion here, right? That's the framework that I'm proposing is industry first. Look at your interface count. Look at your user experience. Try to measure those in a way that makes sense, right? I've proposed a couple score options. If you can't answer both those questions around the solution architectures that you're comparing, you're not ready to make the decision or pulling the trigger on buying something and on going to implementation. And if you want the full breakdown, including scenarios that we listed out and assumptions on how many interfaces you would have in those scenarios to really illustrate what I'm talking about here, it's in this week's newsletter, and I will put the link in the show notes. And so that's it for this week, right? So if you're not subscribed, you can fix that at pureprocurement.ca. We have shows coming out every week. And next week, I'll be going over how to predict how long your ProcureTech project timeline is going to be without a crystal ball, without a bottom-up project management estimate or budget. And I'm really excited to show you that concept. So see you then. That's a wrap on this episode of ProcureTech Unpacked. If this one resonated, subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts and sign up for the Pure Procurement newsletter for weekly insights between episodes. If something we covered sparked a question or an idea, we'd love to hear from you. All the links for the reports we discussed are in the show notes. We'll see you next time.
Resonate.